This is a NOVA training video for the K12 SWP program, and today we're talking about how to make budget modifications in NOVA. That means we're going to talk about the rules around budget modifications. We're going to talk about changes that are under 10%, changes that are over 10%, and differences between single LEAs and multi-LEAs. And then we're going to go through some tips to remember around budget modifications. Let's talk about the rules. The rules around budget modifications say that consortium, so your regional consortium, LARC, is required to approve if you're changing more than 10% to any single line item. And a line item is object code 1000 or object code 2000 on your budget. Also, if you're adding or removing any budget codes, that would also require your consortium to approve the change. And of course, budget modification requests are not allowed to change the overall project allocation for the LEA. All the costs still have to be allowable as required by the grant, and all your new expenses have to be consistent with the purpose and intent of the project that was approved. This was competitive, it was reviewed, so your budget modifications can't materially impact what you are doing. First, let's talk about changes under 10%. This would be changes under 10% that also don't have any adding or removing object codes. And in this case, do nothing. If you're just going to be a little bit off on one of your object codes from your estimates in your original budget, just report on your original budget as you had estimated. Do not worry about making any changes. Variances of less than 10% are fine. Please just go reporting as planned, even if the actuals are a little bit off what you're reporting in NOVA. But if you have a change over 10%, or one that adds or removes object codes, then it's time to go through the budget modification process. The most important thing about this slide is to point out that the LARC process happens before you make any changes in NOVA. We'll walk through both processes. The LARC has a process that involves a form that we complete and upload. They approve everything, and then we go through the NOVA process of decertifying, updating, resubmitting, and getting things reapproved. Before you start any of these, make sure that your fiscal reporting is up to date. While the budgets are being modified, you won't have the ability to access your fiscal reporting for a little while. So it's important to make sure that if you have fiscal reporting that's overdue or coming up soon, get it done now so you don't miss deadlines. And now let's walk through the process of budget modifications. And like I mentioned, it starts with your regional consortia. To access the budget modification area on the LARC homepage, click the menu, click SWP K12, K12 Fiscal, and then we scroll down budget modifications right here, and this tells us everything we need to know. Read these instructions. This is saying a lot of things we've already gone over, but this is also where we find the budget modification request form and where we access the submission page. I'll also point out one important thing about this page, which is there's this instructional guide down here. I have it open on this screen. It's very detailed. If you're confused by anything through this process that this video does not cover, check out this instructional guide. It is very helpful. So this is the budget modification request form we downloaded from the LARC's website. I have it pre-filled in here with a plan I have set up in NOVA. All the details are fake, so do not worry. And this is what that plan looks like in NOVA. You can see here it is in certified state, so we can't change much, but we can see all the details we need for that budget form. So we can see we need the funding round, the title, the funding year, the grantee, point of contact. This is usually your project lead contact down here. And you can see some of the details here. We need the title, the grantee name is the lead agency. Your point of contact should be your primary contact down here. And the round is listed right up here. And now let's fill in the budget section down here. I have this pre-filled in, but let's talk about where these numbers came from. If we scroll all the way down on the plan to the budget section, the top of the budget section is this grant funds summary. This is where we're going to get our roll-up of object code. This matters a lot in your single versus multi-LEA plans because this is where you get your roll-up of all of your object codes, regardless of who the sub-grantee or partner is. So here we've got our 36.6.150.26060, and indirect amount down here. I have those plugged into that form. As you can see, that goes in the first column. The second column that we need here are the total amount that has been expended. And we find that by going to fiscal reports. The easiest way to get to fiscal reporting is to go all the way up top and click on fiscal reporting right here. It's a shortcut. I have the fiscal reporting open right here on the most recently approved quarter. So this is the last approved quarter we have here. And if we scroll down, we see here's the total amounts that have been expended per category. Again, this is all fake. And I've taken those, the most recently approved fiscal report, that's where you get those numbers from. And we've taken those and put them in here as well. And the last thing we need to do is decide what we're moving around. Now you can see the numbers change as I change things. This form does calculate things. This is the last column we can actually adjust. The rest of the columns are all automatic. And things will turn red if you do something wrong, which is very helpful. And this is how we go about making changes. Let's say we wanted to remove half of our budget from object code 1000, which we could not do without this request because it's a 50% of the overall budget, and move that all into object code 3000. So we put a negative 15,000 into object code 1000, positive 15,000 over here. The problem has resolved itself. We can make things a little more complicated. Let's say we're just getting rid of the remainder of the money. We've already spent $2,000 as object code 2000, and we're not going to spend any more. So we're going to take all that object code 4000. This is going to make a pretty big change to that object code. And we're going to put it into capital outlay. So this is an entirely new budget item, which we could not do without this request as well. Let's put 4000 into that one. And now that we made a couple of changes, we can see that all of the issues that were popping up when we were making changes have resolved. Everything looks balanced again. There's no red. We do need to come down here and provide answers to two questions. The explanation of why this request needs to happen. Why are you moving this money around? What's necessitating it? And then talk about how it aligns to the work plan. How does this change move the work forward? Once that's completed, the last thing to do down here is to sign on behalf of the LEA. This is usually your project lead or some other internally authorized person at the LEA. And now that we've completed the form, we go back to the LARC's budget modification section on their website. We click on this link for the budget modification submission page, which is right here. We'd fill out this form, a lot of the same details that you already put in that in the form. The project name's the same, the project round's the same, your organization's your LEA, email should be your contact information. Make sure you check your budget modification requests, upload that form we just completed, and submit this. LARC will get back to you with an approval or not approval, and then direct you to make the changes in Nova. And now let's talk about the process in Nova. Once you've been approved by your regional consortium to make these changes, we come back into Nova, and the first thing we do is go to the preview and submit page here if you're not on it already, and hit this decertify button up here in the top right corner. And now that the plan is back in draft state, we can make some changes to the budget. Over here on the left-hand side, we see the workflow. If you go down to the budget and match section, we can see the budget we put in here. This is a relatively simple one. It's only one LEA that's funded by this plan. And this was the budget that we were given. So looking back at the budget modification request form, we took away $15,000 from this object code. So I'm going to zero this out, make this one 5,000. We took away 4,000 from this object code. Remove 4,000 there. We put $15,000 in this object code, so I'll just split that across the second 2 years. And then we put $4,000 in capital outlay. So I will do that across these 2 years as well. And as you can see, I did my math wrong, which I'm going to claim to have done on purpose. You can see I put a number in wrong and it's telling me I have $1,000 left. I've realized that instead of putting 7,000 here and 8,000 here for a total of 15, which I should have done, I only put 9 there. But once I account for that remaining $1,000, the red stuff goes away. Come on, red stuff. There it goes. Takes a minute sometimes. The red stuff goes away and we see that this is now balanced again and now matches the budget modification request form that we sent in. Similarly, we'd want to make changes to our descriptions. There's a new one down here that we need to fill out for capital outlay. What are we doing with that money? And now that we've made that change, it's a relatively simple one. We're all set. We can go back to preview and submit. We hit submit. And this is now heading back to the regional consortia to approve on their end. They did already approve it through their process, so this should be relatively simple. And once they approve it, this will be back certified until it's reapproved. And while you're making changes, fiscal reporting for this plan will not be available. You might be able to see it, but you will not be able to submit anything or even make any changes. So make sure you get your fiscal reporting done first. And let's look at a different type of plan. This is a multi-LEA grant. This one has many funded organizations. And now let's talk about some differences for this type of grantee. When it comes to the rules or filling out budget modification request forms, there are not that many differences. We still scroll down, and even though there's many budgets that make up the total, the aggregate still is up here. You still see the SWP grant funds, and this is still what we use to fill out that budget modification request form. Where it starts getting a little more complicated is when we start to make changes in NOVA. So we're going to go through the same process. We're going to assume that we filled out the budget modification request form, using the aggregate amounts. We have made changes. We are being consistent with the purpose of the grant and requirements for these funds. So we're going to hit decertify. Again, scroll down to the budget and match section. So now that we have this budget open, we can make changes. And depending on what we included in our budget modification request, there's a couple of changes that are different for a multi-agency grant like this. The biggest one is going to be if you have to remove a partner. And if that happens, we actually don't start down here in the budget section. If your budget modification request is to remove a partner, then we go up to lead and partner agencies. We're looking at Glendora Unified here. We're going to scroll all the way down to Glendora Unified, and we're going to hit this remove agency button. It's telling us they had a planned budget of $350. They plan to contribute $350. They've spent about $20, and they've reported about $225. If we hit the remove button, it lets us do it. They still show up in here. See the red lines are crossed out. They're kind of grayed out a little bit. That's because they're now counted as a removed agency. And if we look back at the budget match section, we can see that we now need to allocate $310, which was the remainder of their budget. NOVA's done this automatically for us. It's saying, we know what they've spent, we know what they're budgeted, here's the difference, please reallocate it. And let's say that Baldwin Park is using those funds. $310. And now we have to go ahead and add the match back that we removed. We removed that partner. Of course, if we are making any changes to our match, we do have to send an email to the grant project coordinator outlining those changes. That's a request from our fiscal agent. So you can see it gets a little bit complicated with these larger ones because you're juggling budgets from different agencies. This budget match summary up here does help out a lot. And in that way, we've removed Glendora Unified. You can still see they show up here because nothing is ever removed or deleted. This is the budget they spent, so it's always the budget they're going to have unless you go back and change fiscal reporting. Another scenario we can see more with the multi-LEA grants is the idea that we would take, let's say, $100,000 from San Gabriel here and distribute amongst other agencies. And the trick here is, let's say our budget modification request said $25,000 was going into object code 2000. Here, And for Walnut Valley down here, let's say the rest of it's going into object code 2000 and object code 5000. You see we've reconciled all the issues. It just gets very tricky between keeping all of the different budgets straight and making sure you're putting things into the right places. These budgets are not always that easy to follow. Just be aware that every time you create a new object code, you will need to explain that object code. And at the bottom down here, this is at the top when it's submitted and certified, but at the bottom of the page when it's in draft form, this is our summary page. And again, we'd want to make sure that this matches whatever we've submitted to the LARC on our budget modification request. And once we've done that and make sure everything matches and everything is what we intended, come down, hit preview and submit, hit submit. And now let's talk about the tips to remember for budget modifications. First off, you do not need a budget modification or to take any action if you are only varying by less than 10% in object codes that you already have in your budget. If you're not removing or adding object codes and you're not changing any by more than 10%, just report on your original budget that you had estimated as normal. Make sure you follow the LARC approval process before you decertify and start making changes in Nova. Make sure that before you start any of these processes, you complete your past due or soon due fiscal reporting. You might not have a chance to do them while the budget modification is happening or being approved. There is no access to fiscal reporting until the plan is recertified. And similarly, don't leave your Nova plan in draft edited status. If you're going in to make budget modifications, going in to make changes, make the changes and resubmit. Like I mentioned, your fiscal reporting will not be available while the plan is open. And that is it. Thank you very much.